Hi team.
Hi, my name is Gergana,
She's Gergana.
and he's Kalyan,
I'm Kalyan.
and welcome to our second writer's blog.
We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get the show on the road.
Yep.
We wrote the script for this video several months ago, and we shot it a couple of times over the last few months. But there was always something wrong with the quality, so let's go with the third time's the charm.
Yep. We received a couple of questions in the comment section of our last video, so we're going to start with that. We really appreciate all your feedback, so if you have any questions or suggestions or anything, please let us know in the comment section below and we'll answer them in our next video.
Now, our first question comes from Christine, who asked, I would like to ask a question about the neighbors. I've read part 4 and I can't wait for part 5. Is it going to be the last one, or are you planning several more? And can you tell me something more about what inspired you to write it?
Well, thank you, Christine, for the question. Between the time we released our first video and now, we published parts 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I'm currently working on parts 9 and 10, which will be the final one, maybe. The inspiration came from my desire to write a Lovecraftian story and all of the crazy neighbors we've had over the years. Thankfully, our current neighbors are very nice, so we can't complain.
Once she's done with the whole story, we'll sit down and do some heavy editing and rewriting. We want to remove the first chapter completely,
Yeah.
making Jackson the only main character. We'll then integrate it somewhere later down the line. And once we're done, we'll start sending the finished manuscript to agents and publisher as our first full-length novel, even before Beyond Hope.
Yeah, very exciting. So, our next question comes from Chufachense, who asked, what is your opinion on Japanese horror movies? Thanks for the question.
It goes without saying that Japanese horror movies are very different from American and Western horror movies in general. As we mentioned last time, horror has many different subgenres, but typically American horror films are more in your face and focus on surprise shocks and fast-paced sequences, like a slasher chasing a victim, for example. On the other hand, Japanese horror movies usually have a bizarre concept, or at least by our standards, and focus more on building a sense of suspense and creepiness. Most of them are adapted from novels or manga, so the stories are generally a bit deeper and build up the tension gradually. That's not to say there aren't extremely gory, violent, and over-the-top movies from Japan, but they tend to be the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, we used to watch a lot of Japanese horror in the past, but we are avoiding it nowadays. While we both love a good scare, some of these movies are just too harrowing and unsettling for us, and we're at an age where we need our beauty sleep.
Yep. Speaking of horror movies, the one we saw most recently was Hereditary, and it just blew our minds. It stars the incredible Toni Collette as Annie, the mother, Gabriel Byrne as Steve, the father, Millie Shapiro as Charlie, the daughter, and Alex Wolff as Peter, the son. They're all terrific in this movie, but that's not the main reason we want to talk about it.
I feel this deserves some backstory. We were really hyped about seeing this movie ever since we watched the first trailers. However, when we walked out of the theater, we were a bit underwhelmed. Because at first glance the film had felt focused, disjointed, and with an unsatisfying ending.
Thankfully, there was something about this movie that just wouldn't let us stop discussing it. We talked about it all night and we realized we had seen an absolute masterpiece. It's impossible to talk about Hereditary properly without spoiling pretty much the entire plot, so you have been warned. If you want to avoid spoilers, please skip ahead.
Yeah, so to reiterate, we'll be spoiling the plot of the entire movie in detail, including the ending, so if you haven't watched it and if you want to watch it, just skip ahead. The movie tells the story of a family with a history of mental illness falling apart after the death of Annie's mother. Then a second, even bigger tragedy strikes halfway through the film and completely shatters their sanity. Paranormal events start happening soon after that, and the movie ends with most of the main characters dead, and Peter, the son, becoming host of a demonic spirit.
As you can imagine, that was a huge letdown for us. Since the satanic cult plot twist was introduced literally in the last 20 minutes of the movie and felt completely out of place. Basically, the first half was like a great psychological drama, and the second half was like a messy paranormal horror.
Yeah. Well, despite all that, we refuse to believe that this ending was what the writer and director Ari Aster had envisioned and set out to achieve. The film was simply crafted too well, and the first half was executed so perfectly that the second half made little sense when taken at face value. It just didn't belong in the same movie.
So we started talking about it, and we soon realized we had been completely wrong. Our breakthrough came thanks to the miniatures Annie had been creating throughout the entire movie, which were masterfully used as a framing device on multiple occasions. As the story went on, they got darker and darker, symbolizing her descent into madness. The very first and last scenes are particularly noteworthy because they tie the whole thing together. Now, the opening shot is zooming in on a miniature that turns into Peter's bedroom, and the last one is zooming out of a treehouse, which turns into a miniature. We realized that none of the paranormal events in the second half of the movie had ever happened outside of Annie's mind. The brilliance of Hereditary lies in the fact that it never explains what is actually going on. It simply puts you in Annie's shoes. As somebody with a family history of mental illness, and as a psychologist, I can attest that this is exactly how schizophrenia usually progresses, and it's one of the reasons why it's so hard for the affected person to realize they're sick. The stories and beliefs their minds fabricate have their own internal logic and are impossible to discern from real life.
Yeah, and in addition, every scene has a resolution and a payoff at some point. For example, it is established very early on that Charlie has a nut allergy. Towards the end of the first half, there is a scene showing walnuts being cut for cake. Charlie then eats a cake and has a severe allergic reaction, propelling the plot forward. This is storytelling 101. There's action and reaction, cause and consequence. There are many such scenes in the movie, and you have to be paying a lot of attention. This is also the second reason we believe this is a movie about mental illness and not a movie about satanic cults full of naked old people. If our understanding of the movie is correct, then every single scene is there for a reason. And if our understanding is not correct, it means there are roughly 30 minutes of pointless exposition. It's unthinkable that a considerate storyteller like Ari Aster would include so many meaningless scenes in his narrative.
For example, it's established early on that Annie is a sleepwalker and sometimes does things completely opposite to her and her family's best interest while sleepwalking. One of her miniatures shows Peter's headless body lying in bed, and she later tries to pull his head off while sleepwalking. She tells of one occasion when she almost set herself and her family on fire while sleepwalking, and later she does burn her husband alive. She visits a support group and talks about her family's tragic history of mental illness, which wouldn't make much sense if the movie was about actual demonic possession, but makes perfect sense in the context of her implied schizophrenia. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, well, the point is, most of the scenes in the second half of the film are partial or full hallucinations that she's having, and we're seeing through her eyes, not actual events. There are countless other symbols, metaphors, and brilliant filmmaking techniques. We could talk about this movie, but we'd better stop here for the sake of time. Still, if you guys are interested in having a more in-depth discussion, we would love to have it in our next hangout.
Yeah. Moving on, another movie we saw recently was A Quiet Place, starring Emily Blunt and her real-life husband John Krasinski, who's also the director.
Yeah, I like The Quiet Place overall, but that doesn't mean I think it's a perfect movie. The concept was great, the execution was good, and all the actors delivered stellar performances. But on the other hand, the exposition was sometimes heavy-handed, and certain scenes existed just so the movie could move forward and didn't make much sense.
For me, the main issue was that the climax of the movie happened halfway through in that bathtub from the trailer, and nothing afterwards came even close to the same level of tension and drama. Still, it was a decent movie and a great directorial debut for John Krasinski.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. Okay, so there is one last movie we want to talk about, and it's called Tale of Tales, starring Salma Hayek, Vincent Cassel, Toby Jones, and John C. Reilly, among others. So big names.
I consider this to be a horror movie as well, mainly because of how bad the writing is. It's so terrible, it's scary.
Yeah, it's a disaster, and it's not even bad in a good way, like The Room or Batman and Robin. It's a movie with gorgeous sets and costumes, very good actors, but no substance whatsoever. The plot is non-existent. There's just a series of random events that lead nowhere and mean absolutely nothing.
Yep, it's movies like these that give independent productions a bad name. Save yourselves the pain and steer clear of Tale of Tales. You'll have a better time watching paint dry.
Or, better yet, reading a good book.
We're getting so good at these seamless transitions.
So we talked about the fourth book in the Dark Tower series last time, and today we're going to talk about the next two books, The Wind Through the Keyhole and Wolves of the Kala.
The Wind Through the Keyhole follows the fourth book chronologically. However, it was written last, after Stephen King had already finished the series. It is my favorite by far, mainly because of its awesome narrative technique.
Yeah, once again, it's a story within a story, but this time there is a third layer. So it's a story within a story within a story. The amazing thing is they all work incredibly well together, despite how counterintuitive and almost jarring it sounds. They're written so well, we didn't mind the breaks in pacing or the introduction of completely new characters twice in the middle of the main story. One of the main selling points for me was the absence of Stephen King's usual fondness for long, drawn-out side stories and descriptions. The book is tight, focused, and with plenty of fast-paced action.
Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about Wolves of the Kala. I loved every word of the first five books, but it is here where the Dark Tower's fall from grace begins. It's still a relatively enjoyable read, but several main story threads begin their slow unraveling, and somehow it's always in the most unsatisfying manner. While I was constantly surprised, delighted, and literally in awe previously, here I found myself underwhelmed and frustrated more often than not. The seeds of all the issues plaguing the next two books of the series are planted here, and I was completely baffled by some of King's decisions.
Well, we'll discuss these issues in more detail next time, since we both disliked the last two books quite a bit and we don't want to repeat ourselves.
So we have plenty of movies and books we want to talk about, including Wind River, Deadpool 2, and Black Panther. In the
And
meantime,
Mission Impossible.
yeah, Mission Impossible 2. In the meantime, we'll be waiting for Tor.com's response to our novella submission, and we'll keep on trucking like we usually do. Kirana being consistent and awesome, and me being the Kalian.
Last but not least, please check our stories in the links below and support our work on Patreon. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe if you want. Thanks a lot for everything.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and be excellent to each other.
Bye!